Welcome to Lekpa's tutorial. Today we'll be looking at the anatomy of the spinal cord. In our previous video, we've discussed about the brain, and the brain and the spinal cord together made up the central nervous system. So, as we proceed on the study of the spinal cord, I hope you will listen and learn. So now, what is the spinal cord? The spinal cord is an elongated cylindrical structure suspended in the vertebral column that is protected by the vertebrae. It is a continuation of the brain. So when the brain crosses, when the brain continues as the medulla oblongata and crosses the foramen magnum, it continues as the spinal cord. So the primary function of the spinal cord is for transmission of neural signal between the brain and the rest of the body part. So these informations are transmitted maybe through like sensory information, motor information, or through local reflexes. So as I said, and it is an extension from the foramen magnum to the second lumbar vertebrae. So the spinal cord continues from the foramen magnum around the neck region now as a year, as the brain continue as medulla oblongata, the spinal cord continue throughout the entire length of the vertebral column, throughout the entire length of the vertebral column, and then terminates between the second lumbar vertebra. Continuation above is as medulla oblongata, and its end, towards the end, it becomes a taping inferiorly to form what we call the conus medullaris. It is connected to the coccyx by a non-neuronal cord called the filum terminae. There are about 31 spinal nerves that emerges from the spinal cord. Those nerves are called spinal nerves. And the nerves emerges based on the vertebral segments. So we have 8 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and 1 coccygeus or coccygeal nerve. Now, the spinal cord has 2 enlargements. We have the cervical or superior enlargement, and then we have the lower or lumbosacral enlargement. The superior enlargement or the cervical enlargement is what gave rise to the brachial plexus. The brachial plexus now innervates the upper limb, gives innervation to the entire upper limb. Now, the inferior, the lumbosacral enlargement, that's the lower enlargement, is the one that gave rise to the lower limb and part of the pelvic perineum. Now, having looked at the spinal cord in its cylindrical nature, if we take a cross section of the spinal cord, we are going to see a kind of a butterfly-like structure. It looks like a butterfly. As you can see in the diagram represented here. So the spinal cord is divided into 2 parts, anteriorly by a short, shallow medial feature and posteriorly by a deep, narrow septum. That is the posterior medial sulcus. You can see the anterior medial feature here that gives that curvature of the spinal cord. So the spinal cord is made up of both the gray matter and white matter. Remember in our previous video, I told you about the gray matter of the cerebral cortex forming the outer layer, while the white matter forming the inner layer. But in the spinal cord, it's the opposite. It's the opposite. So the outer layer is made up of gray matter, while the inner layer is made up of white matter. It is important to note that connection between the left and the right halves of the spinal cord is possible through what we call the commissural fibers. commissural fibers. So the gray matter is centrally located, which is within the central canal, while the white matter is the one that is towards the outer surface. The spinal cord also has roots. Roots. Spinal nerves arises as rootlets, then combine to form roots. So we have the dorsal or posterior roots, which has ganglion. Ganglion are aggregation of nuclei. Then we have the ventral or anterior roots of the spinal cord. The arrangement of the spinal of the gray matter in the spinal cord resembles the shape of the letter H, or a butterfly-like structure, or letter H, having two posterior, two anterior, two lateral horn or column. And the spinal cord consists of nerve cells bodies and their processes, neuroglai and the blood vessels. Now, let's look at the inner layer of the spinal cord. So the nerve cells of the gray matter are multipolar neurons and are of three main categories. Three main categories of multipolar neurons. Remember the types of neurons we said in previous video? About 4 types of neuron: unipolar, multipolar, bipolar, and pseudopolar neurons. Now, these neurons that are found within the white matter, the first one is the sensory neurons. That is where the sensory information are passed from the organs to the brain. Then we have the lower motor neurons that transmit impulses from the brain or from the spinal cord to the skeletal muscles. Then we have the interneurons. This is the linkage. It links the sensory and the motor neuron together at the same or different level of and form what we call this spinal reflex arc within the system. It is important to note that if we look at the spinal cord, the architecture of the spinal cord, the spinal cord are arranged in different groups and layers called the lamina of the spinal cord. So cells of the same types are clustered into groups which occur in a long column. In transverse section, this column appears as layers, especially within the dorsal horn. Now, these layers are called the laminae of Rexed that are numbered by Roman figure. You can see from the diagram here, you can see lamina 1, lamina 2, lamina 3, lamina 4, lamina 5, and lamina 6. They are all arranged up to lamina 10. On this other side, you can see 7. This is 7, this is 8, this is 9, this is 10. So the spinal cord are arranged in lamina. Now the groups are categorized into 4. We have the group that are called the substantia gelatinosa group. We have the nuclear propros. We have the nucleus dorsalis, and then we have the visceral afferent nucleus. Now, the substantia gelatinosa, you find the lamina 2 located at the apex of the horn, which is composed of large neurons extend throughout the length of the spinal cord. You find the lamina 2 in this first group. Then, if we go to the second group, that is the nucleus propros, we see the rex lamina 4 located anterior to the substantia gelatinosa, composed of large neurons which extend throughout the length of the spinal cord as well. Then the nucleus dorsalis, that's a cracked nucleus thoracis. We have lamina 7 within this region, and it extends from C8 to L3 to L4. See the various lamina. I know somehow for beginners, this aspect of the spinal cord, you find it a little bit difficult to understand, but with time, when we get deeper into neuroscience, neuroanatomy, you will understand the various lamina. So we have lamina, the various lamina being represented on the spinal cord. Now, nerve cells or groups in the ventral horn. There are a group of neurons or cells that are found within the ventral horn. We have the motor neuron, also called the upper motor neuron. It's important to note that the motor neuron within the spinal cord are called, lower motor neuron are called the lower motor neuron. The one within the brain is called the upper motor neurons. Now, these motor neurons that are found in the ventral horn are of two types. We have the large multipolar cells, whose axon pass out in the ventral roots of spinal nerves as alpha afferent, which innervate extrafugal muscles, fibers of the skeletal muscles. Then we have the less numerous, smaller multipolar cells. This one, their axon pass out in the ventral efferent, which innervates intrafugal muscles, muscle fibers of the neuromuscular spindles. Both alpha and gamma motor neurons are under the influence of the descending pathways or the descending tract from the brain. So we have the large numerous cells and we have the less numerous multipolar neurons. Motor neurons are classified into three groups. We have the medial groups, we have the central groups, and we have the lateral groups. The medial groups present in most segments, which innervates the muscles of the neck, the trunk, including the intercostal and abdominal muscles. The central motor neurons are the smallest and they are present in some cervical segment. That is the phrenic from C4, C3 to C5, then spinal accessories C1 to C6, and the lumbosacral part, which is L2 to S1. Then we have the lateral group, which is present in the cervical and lumbosacral segment, innervates in the innervate muscles of the limbs. Small columns composed of small neurons and they extend from the L2 to L3 segment and give rise to the preganglionic sympathetic fiber. And then they also extend from S2 to 4 segment, which give rise to the preganglionic parasympathetic fibers. Now, coming to the white matter of the spinal cord, the white matter of the spinal cord consists of a mixture of nerve fibers, neuroglai, and blood cells. White color, this you can see that in this part of the spinal cord, there is a high proportion of myelinated nerve fibers. These nerve fibers are covered by myelin sheath, which helps in the propagation and transmission of impulses faster. So the white matter of the spinal cord is arranged in column or funiculi. So we have the anterior column or anterior funiculi, posterior and lateral column. The nerve fiber are arranged as bundles running vertically throughout the cord. So within the white matter, you see a lot of bundles that are arranged. So a group of 9 fibers, that is the axon, that shared common origin, termination, and function formed a tract or fasciculus. So within the funiculus or within the horn of the spinal cord, we see a lot of fasciculus, a lot of tracts, We have the spinothalamic tract, we have the spinal, a lot of tracts that goes to the spinal cord and from the spinal cord. This tract formed by sensory nerves, nerve fiber ascending to the brain, motor nerve fiber descending from the brain fiber of the effector neuron. So the ones that are going to the brain, when these neurons, when these axons, group of nerve fiber come together to form this tract, the one that's going to the brain, they are called the ascending fibers, and the one that's coming from the brain are called the descending fibers. So these tracts are often named according to their point of origin and destination. So, for example, now we have the spinothalamic tract. Spinothalamic tract, meaning that it is coming from the spinal cord and terminate at the thalamus. Now we have the corticospinal tract, meaning that it's coming from the cortex and terminate in the spinal cord. So we have numerous of these tracts that is found within the white matter of the spinal cord. If you can see from this diagram, we have the descending tract here, the lateral corticospinal tract, the robospinal tract, the ventral corticospinal tract, the vestibulospinal tract. Then when you come to the other side, we have the ascending tract here, which we have the dorsal, within the dorsal column, we have the fasciculus gracilis, we have the fasciculus cuneatus, we have the dorsal spinocerebellar tract, we have the ventral spinocerebellar tract, we have the lateral spinothalamic tract, and then we have the ventral spinothalamic tract. So these are ascending and descending pathway within the spinal cord. Now, the two halves of the H-like or butterfly-like structure of the spinal cord are connected by commissural fibers, as the commissure of the spinal cord. The transverse bridge of gray matter connecting the anterior and the posterior gray horn on each side of the spinal cord. Then centrally, you will see the central canal of the spinal cord. So we have the white commissure, which lie ventral to the gray commissure, and then mainly contain the dissociating nerve fibers. It's nerve fiber that crosses over to the opposite direction. Now the central canal is centrally located here. You can see from the diagram here. That is where the cerebrospinal cord continues to flow from the brain through to the spinal cord. So the cerebrospinal field space that run longitudinally through the entire length of the spinal cord is called the central canal. It is also lined by epidermal cells, cells containing ciliated columnar epithelium, as we discussed in our previous video. So this helps to produce or to secrete the cerebrospinal fluid that help to nourish the spinal cord to ensure that the spinal cord absorb shock and be in a better position. So the central canal is a continuation of the ventricular system of the brain. So superiorly, it opens into the fourth ventricle, while inferiorly into the conus medullaris. It expands into the fusiform terminale ventricle and terminates below the root of the filum terminae. Now, it is important to note that different regions of the vertebral column, at different region of the vertebral column, the spinal cord has some differences, some variation. You can see at the level of the cervical vertebrate here, you can see at the level of the thoracic here, you can see at the level of lumbar here, and you can see at the level of the sacral vertebrate here. So the shape and the sizes of the spinal cord differs. So although generally the pattern of the gray matter is the same all through the spinal cord, but there are some differences in their cross section at different levels. The understanding the anatomy of the spinal cord at the various levels is key to know the activity that is happening or the activity that is affected if there is a lesion of the lower motor neuron, because it will determine the behavior or of the individual affected at that region of the spinal cord. The spinal cord is also covered with meninges. Meninges, that's connective tissue membrane surrounding spinal cord and the brain. We've discussed it when we discussed the brain, the dura mater, the arachnoid matter, as well as the pia matter. So there are some spaces within this covering. We have what we call the epidural space containing blood vessels, connective tissue, and fats. And then we have the subdural space containing serum fluid. And then we have subarachnoid space containing cerebrospinal fluid, blood vessels within a web-like strands of arachnoid tissue. So conclusively, the spinal cord plays a critical role in movement. So injury to the spinal cord can cause paralysis and can cause various movement disorders. So understanding the anatomy, the neuroanatomy of the spinal cord is key to understand the anatomy or details pathology of impairment or injury or motor disorders that can occur as a result of that. So we have discussed so far the spinal cord as a continuation from the brain, from the level of the foramen magnum, superiorly bonded by the medulla oblongata, and then terminates below within the level of L2. Then we've also talked about the various enlargement of the spinal cord, the superior enlargement or the cervical enlargement that forms the brachial plexus, and the inferior enlargement, the lumbosacral enlargement that forms the lumbosacral plexus. We've also looked at the cross section of the spinal cord, and we've discussed about the white matter and the gray matter. We've also talked about the various parts of the spinal cord, that is the parts, the horn, as well as the various tract, the fasciculus that is found within the level of the spinal cord. We've equally discussed the laminae of the spinal cord from lamina 1 to lamina 10 as they have been arranged, and the various functions or what they do. Then that's the cytoarchitecture of the spinal cord. And then we come back to discuss the commissure as well as the canal of the spinal cord. And this video will help you to get the basis of what the spinal cord is about. So in our subsequent video, probably we'll discuss about pathology or injury to any what happened if any of these various tracts that we have discussed. For example, the corticospinal tract, if there's an injury to the upper motor neuron or there's an injury to the lower motor neuron, what happened? And that will help us to understand the basis of uh, movement disorders. Thank you very much, and God bless you. Looking forward to you viewing the next video. Please subscribe to this video and share to as many as you can. Thank you. Bye for now.